The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Wills.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I am going to talk about tax and tax policy and tax cuts, because this is what this is all about, this debate. And it's a very important debate because, and I want to acknowledge the member for raising this motion or moving this motion, because the cost of living remains the #1 concern of voters across the country. And many members of my community in Wills and many other electorates across the country have been struggling for the past few years with the cost of living. It's crunched living standards and it's made ordinary working people worse off. And it's important to remember that this wasn't by accident. We've had for 10 years, Deputy Speaker, a coalition government that squeezed ordinary Australians through raising taxes to their highest levels for over 30 years. That's just a fact. And gouging hard-earned money from many of my hard-working community. Now, this is coupled with, to quote the former Finance Minister Matthias Cormann's deliberate policy to keep wages low, which has held our country back and left ordinary people behind. And your members will recall, I'm sure the member for Kennedy will recall this, when the former Treasurer Joe Hockey was dismissive and in his entitled tone said he talked about lifters and leaners, reflecting a sentiment synonymous with the coalition and their utter indifference to ensuring we look after working people and develop a tax system that is both fair and also encourages aspiration. Given this frankly embarrassing record, Deputy Speaker, of supposedly being the party of low tax, which they are the opposite of, highest taxes in 30 years, it is galling to hear the crowing from the coalition on tax and cost of living now that they're in opposition, when they did nothing about it for 10 years. And I'm pleased to say that this government, the Albanese government, has a very different approach, Deputy Speaker. We have an ambitious tax reform agenda, and the cost of living tax cuts we delivered are a key part of that. These cost of living tax cuts were aimed at Middle Australia. They were aimed at building foundations for a better future. Our tax changes mean, in my community of Wills, in my electorate of Wills, 78,000 taxpayers in my community will have received a tax cut on 1st of July. And under our plan, an additional 2.9 million Australians who were previously excluded under Scott Morrison's plan now share in the tax cuts the Albanese Labor government delivered, because we moved the bulk of those tax cuts to Middle Australia, middle income earners, low and middle income earners, not the top 5% or the top 1%. Our changes to the coalition plan have also meant that 85% of all people in my electorate of Wills will be better off as a result. And these tax cuts also have an eye to the future, Deputy Speaker. Under the government's plan, the average taxpayer will pay approximately $22,000 less of their income in tax over the next decade. That's money back in their pocket. Money back in their pocket that they can use for the cost of living. This will also increase the labour supply and add to the efforts of both the RBA and government to ensure inflation returns to target. These ambitions, coupled with the government's policy to stimulate wages, are aimed to ensure Australians are better off. Now, beyond the cost of living tax cuts, the government's reform agenda is all about making the tax system fairer. This includes ensuring that multinational companies pay their fair share of tax, and it's also about ensuring that superannuation concessions are fairer and more affordable. It's about ensuring that reforms to the petroleum resource rent tax ensure that offshore LNG companies deliver more of their profits to the Australian people rather than offshore investors. And it's about improving tax compliance to ensure individuals and businesses who follow the rules are not disadvantaged by the unfair practices of those who do exploit the system. Now, Deputy Speaker, ultimately, the Albanese Labor government's cost of living tax cuts are good for Middle Australia. We know that. Good for women, good for helping with cost of living pressures, and good for the economy. Treasury advice, Deputy Speaker, shows that these tax cuts will not add to the inflationary pressures and will contribute to ensuring that inflation returns to target. The Labor government introduced these tax cuts because it recognises the economic realities of 2024, the world that we're living in today. Australians are under pressure right now and deserve a tax plan that responds to the challenges they are now facing. That's why the tax cuts are going into their pockets. Gone are the days where the coalition deliberately kept wages low. This government, the Albanese Labor government, is committed to ensuring Australians can earn more and keep more of what they earn.